Hi there, everybody. This is Tracy Malone. Today, I have got a very special guest with me. You know, I like to bring you people that are doing great things in this arena, in the abuse arena. My guest today is Joyce Short. Joyce Short is the author of 3 books, and she is leading a revolution, a movement to change the meaning of the word consent in our legal documentation to better be able to charge people that are the predators in a rape and other sexual abuse situations. If the definition of consent is defined in our laws, life will change for many people, including us as victims of abuse. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Joyce and let you hear exactly what she's doing. And I'm hoping that some of you might step up and go, I want to help, because this is a movement that needs people in every state, in every country. So if this touches your soul, reach out to her. We're going to put her information down below. It'll be under her name when we actually launch this video, and reach out and try to make a difference. Every little bit helps. Again, this is Tracy. Visit my website, Narcissist Abuse Support. So let's welcome Joyce.
Hi there. Thank you for having me on.
You're welcome. I would love it if you would take a minute to introduce yourself, because to me, you are a movement leader. You are making a difference in the world, and you are in this arena where the people that listen to my channel are looking for help. So tell us what you do and how you got started, maybe.
Well, I've written 3 books actually on sexual assault, and I'm actually the founder of a coalition called the Consent Awareness Network. And our mission is to, oh, look at that. You've got my books. How wonderful. You don't have that one up.
Don't have the 3rd one.
That's the new one.
You have it, but I don't know why I don't bring it down.
Yeah. That's the new one. So yeah, our mission is to define consent for society, and also to define consent in our laws throughout the United States and around the world, because consent is just not defined in our laws, as absurd as that may seem.
That is absolutely obscene, because, like, you know, everything is about, you know, consent, and well, if there's no definition, like how easy is it for abusers to get off? So I know
Exactly.
that you did a TED Talk and it was amazing. So I highly recommend to anyone to go watch her TED Talk on this topic. But you described what consent is, because I think, you know, just yes, I agree to have sex with you, or, you know, it's much deeper than that. So tell us what the meaning of consent is.
All right, consent is a form of agreement, and it's not the only form of agreement. There are actually 3 different kinds of agreement that can take place when you're involved in sexual contact. But consent is freely given, knowledgeable, and informed agreement. I like to refer to it as #FGKIA. And we come by that particular definition. I didn't just pull it out of my hat. It's actually the amalgam of a number of different provisions that are currently adhered to throughout the world. One of them is the General Data Protection Regulation that protects our cyber privacy. And the interesting thing is that General Data Protection Regulation, which people refer to as GDPR, actually became, it actually went into effect in May of 2018. And also in May of 2018, I presented my TED Talk. And the irony is that the definition for GDPR and the definition for my TED Talk was practically identical. So we're not dealing with nonsense here. We're dealing with what the definition of consent actually is. And we know in your cyber privacy that you are entitled to freely given, knowledgeable, and informed agreement in order to release your data or have anybody release your data over the internet. Also, it's consistent with Nuremberg Code. A Nuremberg Code was the result of the Nuremberg trials that took place back in the 1940s as a result of World War II. And many people, might not even be aware of the Nuremberg trials. I remember as a child hearing about it. But basically, there was a tremendous amount of research, inappropriate research that was done on prisoners in concentration camps. And the end result is that I believe there were 21 Nazis that were tried during the Nuremberg trials. A lot of people that would have been tried, like Hitler and Goebbels, I believe, also committed suicide. And so there were people that weren't alive to be tried through the Nuremberg trials. And the Nuremberg trials created Nuremberg Code. And Nuremberg Code is why you have to sign a consent form when you go into a doctor's office and have some kind of medical procedure, or why, if you're involved in a clinical trial of some type of medication, you have to sign a consent form. And even in Nuremberg Code, it actually identifies the difference between assent and consent. The reason that there is a distinction between assent and consent is because you can agree to something, but if you've been forced or tricked or coerced into agreeing to whatever that thing is, and it doesn't matter what it is, consent is consent, no matter how it's applied. But in Nuremberg Code, it sets a standard so that if a medical procedure is done to a child, then that child has to sign an assent form. And the parent or the guardian has to sign a consent form. And the reason for that being that the child, even if they're knowledgeable and informed, are not yet at the age of reason. So you can give them all the knowledge and information that possibly exists, but are they capable of actually reasoning properly with that knowledge and information? And under the law, until they are the age of reason, which in most states is 16 or thereabouts, then they have to sign an assent form, and the parent or the guardian has to sign a consent form. And the other type of agreement that can often get confused for consent in sexual conduct is what Harvey Weinstein did, and that was coercion. He basically made people fearful. He threatened their livelihood. He threatened their careers. They felt forced by, not so much by violence, but by the fear of their livelihood being taken away. And so when you try to induce someone into action by coercing them, they're not consenting, even if you agree. And oftentimes you'll hear people try to define consent by use of the term consent, and that doesn't work. If you can, what you should be saying instead of using this term consent liberally, like every form of agreement is consent, right, is to use the word agreement rather than consent. So that if you were defining consent, you would say that it's a form of agreement, not it's a form of consent. And sometimes in our laws, that's what they say. Consent is consent. No, consent is a form of agreement. What kind of form of agreement? It's freely given, knowledgeable, and informed agreement. So that's basically what consent is.
And that's an amazing explanation, because I met you. You were actually the first person I interviewed, and we've done a few since then. So, I've been talking to you about this for a while. And what people don't really understand is like that coercive control. Like if you don't know all the facts, right? If you don't know that this person has been married 4 other times and is still married, then you're not getting all the facts, right? Doesn't that fit into you know, part of your mission and part of your movement is that knowing all the facts is part of why consent isn't, correct me if I'm wrong. Tell me
You're
how
absolutely right.
Tell me how that works into here so people can understand, because remember, my people have been abused by narcissists, whether they were married to them or dated them. But if they had some false information that they were basically conned into this, not knowing that this person wasn't who they represented themselves to. Can you speak to that? And I know
Absolutely.
you have a story about how you all started this, that you might
Yes.
share for me, because I think it'll help people better understand where
Okay.
you're going.
Now you've asked me 4 questions all at the same time, so I'll try and pry them apart a little bit here.
Did you
Okay.
count them? Because I didn't remember them.
Okay. So basically, when you look at consent and you look at agreement, we have a concept called fraud in fact. And if you are defrauding this person with facts that are incorrect, then you're not seducing them, you're sexually assaulting them. Now, that doesn't mean that every single case of sexual assault by fraud will be tried in a court of law, because there are other things that also have to be applied in the justice system. So just because someone lies to you in order to have sex with you doesn't mean necessarily that you'll have a case that you can take to the police. What the police and the prosecutor need in order to prosecute a case is very significant proof that this lie actually was told to you, or that there was some evidence given to you that proves that there was a fraud in fact, that you were deceived by. So you have to be able to prove that there was a fraud in fact, and you have to be a person who has a reasonable basis for believing that lie. So now let me cover real quickly reasonable person, because a lot of people give me an argument about, well, the reasonable person, who's reasonable and what constitutes reasonable. If you look at the trial of Bill Cosby, the jury, the very first question that they asked the judge when they were deliberating was, what is the legal definition for consent? So everybody wants to know, whenever there's a sexual assault case, they want to know, what's the legal definition for consent? Now, the judge, his name was Stephen O'Neill, he responded to the jury. I hope you're holding your hat if you have one on. You're reasonable people, use your common sense.
Wow.
Yeah. So now fortunately, and so you know that in the first jury, it was a hung jury. Mm-hmm. They couldn't reach a decision. In the second jury, there was something very, very different that went on. One thing that was different was that they included additional victims in order to establish the kind of behavior that made that Bill Cosby had a history of. And so by establishing that, it simply did more to prove that that what Andrea Constant was saying was correct. But the other thing that was very, very different was the person who was the foreperson for the jury.
Okay.
The foreperson for the jury was a woman by the name of Cheryl Carmel. And by the way, Cheryl Carmel is now working with CAN, my coalition. It's the Consent Awareness Network, and we call it CAN. And we approached the legislators in Pennsylvania in order to define consent in their laws. And we were well received, and probably as a result of the fact that this is what happened in the Bill Cosby case. And when we went to call on the legislators in Pennsylvania, we brought Cheryl Carmel with us. And Cheryl is a cybersecurity expert. And as a cybersecurity expert, she was very familiar with GDPR. And if you recall, GDPR is a very, very similar definition to the definition in my TED Talk, freely given, knowledgeable, and informed agreement. So based on her knowledge of cybersecurity law and cybersecurity law, GDPR affects everyone around the world. Even though it's international law and it was established by the European Union, in fact, if you want to conduct business on the internet with anybody in Europe, you have to abide by GDPR. If not, you've broken international law. Mm-hmm. So the jury was able to, recognize the real meaning of consent, and recognized that that consent did not exist in this circumstance. So, we need for every, unfortunately, Cheryl Carmel cannot be the foreperson for every jury. It just doesn't work that way. We need laws that will guide people's behavior and hold people accountable so that we can actually prosecute them when they break the law. And that's the reason why it's so important to define consent in the laws all around the country. And it's also absolutely imperative to define consent federally. Federal law affects people in the military. And people in the military, unfortunately, the volume of rape and sexual assault in the military is, it's criminal. It is criminal, but it's shocking how many soldiers that give their life, put their life on the line in order to protect our nation are sexually assaulted in the process of trying to do so. And our federal laws should be there to protect them, and they're not.
So I know that you've been working with people from state to state, and building teams, and this is one of the reasons I want people to be aware of it, understand what your mission is here and how it affects people, so that maybe we can find someone that's in another state that goes, this is pissing me off, I want to do something. We have so many victims that stand up and go, what can I do to help this movement? What can I do to change the world? And that's what you're doing. Your role is to sit there and get those people and inform them of the rule and how to talk to the right people. Want to tell me a little bit more about how people get involved and what they do to change the rules?
So we have a web page. It's called consentawareness.net. And in the upper right-hand corner, you can tap the little icon that says be an ambassador. And that means basically that you're going to help us get in touch with the legislators in your district or in your jurisdiction. Because we're coming from the outside walking in. You're their constituent. You vote for them. They will listen to you. And when you tell them, I want you to get this done, I want you to take this seriously, I want you to make this change, then we can take it from there. We can give them the materials. We have free resources that we've created, and anybody can see any of our resources. One of them is a cartoon for kids that we just produced. It's called Your Consent for Kids, and it's intended to be watched by a parent with their children or by a teacher with their children. And it will teach somebody who's 6 years old what the meaning of consent is. And don't be afraid. It's not, it's G-rated. It's about going to the park or, going to the sandbox, buying an ice cream cone. Mm-hmm. We'll give the legislators the resources that we've created, my TED Talk, my book, Your Consent, The Key to Conquering Sexual Assault. It's basically our guide that enables us to get the legislators to really understand what the problem is and how to make the change. In fact, Right now, we're dealing with the legislators in Pennsylvania. Tomorrow at 4 o'clock, we actually have another phone call with them. And in this phone call, Andrea Constant is going to join us in order to help, get this point across to the legislators of Pennsylvania. So anybody can just push that little magic button on the Consent Awareness Network's webpage and be an ambassador. So that's one thing that they can do. Another thing they can do is they can read Your Consent. Let me get it out here. Here we go. Your Consent, the Key to Conquering Sexual Assault. And so that you know the terminology, you know what it's about. You understand what the difference is between assent and acquiescence and consent. And you're able to kind of diffuse some of the naysaying stupidity backlash that we all hear, for the lame excuses of why we are not defining consent in our laws. So just a couple of things that your folks can do in order to give us a hand. And donations are welcome, of course. We're not, everything costs money, as you know. And, the more, every nickel that we raise goes directly to, making the world a safer place. So by all means, donations are very helpful. And we have a donate button on our webpage as well.
Okay. So where do we stand with the consent? I mean, how many states have bought onto it? What is the status? Does Colorado have this law in force?
It doesn't. Actually, I can read to you what Colorado is if you want. In this book, we have every state and territory throughout the United States listed here, and it identifies not only what the current rules are in regard to consent, and that those are provisions and not actually definitions, and I'll explain that to you in a couple of seconds. Let me fill you in on Colorado, and I'm going to put my reading glasses on, because if I don't have my reading glasses on, I might read you California instead of Colorado. So make sure I have Colorado. I got my reading glasses here. Okay, here's Colorado. Consent is cooperation, act, or attitude pursuant to any exercise of free will and with knowledge of the nature of the act. Submission under fear shall not constitute consent. Well, at least they got that last part right? That's coercion, and they got coercion right. But here's what's wrong with it, and you're going to see problems with the existing law is one of the columns in this guide. And basically, the word pursuant is not a word that people understand, and really shouldn't be in a straightforward definition. Here's the definition: freely given, knowledgeable, and informed agreement. In the bill that we're hopefully introducing in Pennsylvania, we were actually trying to get this done on April the 7th, which was the day of action for Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And unfortunately, because of the pandemic, everything was put on hold. So we're now trying to get the train back up on the track. And we're going to try and do that tomorrow evening, in fact. But basically, this says cooperation, act, or attitude pursuant to any exercise of free will and with knowledge of the nature of the act. Well, they got that partially right. Knowledge of the nature of the act, absolutely. But it's not a definition, it's a provision. And here's the difference between a provision and a definition. A provision tells us how to behave. It actually tells us how to put into action the words that are defined. If you don't define them properly, then you can't even begin to understand how you take action with it. So we have to have a syncing between the definition and the provision. The other reason that you have to sync the definition to the provision is because of an old legal doctrine that dates all the way back to the Roman era, and it's nulla pene sine lege, and that basically means
Hakuna Matata.
Okay. It's Latin for basically, if it's not prohibited by law, it's permissible. So without a definition telling you what consent is, then all we have are laws that look like a Swiss cheese umbrella full of legal loopholes. And sexual predators just slide right into those legal loopholes without any kind of guidance and without any kind of accountability. Now, what we've seen, over the last few years is that when a real atrocity happens, our legislators in that particular jurisdiction may be outraged, and they may try to plug up that particular legal loophole. When you watch my TED Talk, you'll see the legal loophole about a fellow by the name of Donald Grant Ward. And he had climbed in bed with a young woman who had fallen asleep in the arms of her boyfriend in the upper bunk of his bunk bed. And when she woke up, keep in mind that his arms were around her when she fell asleep. And when she woke up, she felt a hand on her breast, and the hand traveled down her torso into her underwear and engaged her in sex. A couple of minutes into it, she had to go to the bathroom. And so she gets down out of the bunk bed. She goes to the ladies' room. She comes back, and the fellow sitting on the bunk bed was not her boyfriend. It was Donald Grant Ward, sitting and smiling down at her. And she was just kind of bewildered. She really just didn't understand what had happened. She was confused. She went down to her room. This was a co-ed dorm. I won't even bother, because I'm sure you've got a lot of millennials that watch. In my day, University of Georgia, big state university, 10 o'clock, the house mother flipped the lights and everybody had to come in for bed check. And there was no such thing as a co-op dorm anyway. So she goes down to her room, and her boyfriend is now sleeping in her bed in her room. And she woke him up and said, how long have you been here? And they figured out that what Donald Ward had done. The boyfriend went down and confronted him. And Donald Ward admitted what he had done. He knew that he had tricked her. He admitted that he tried to trick her and knew that he was tricking her. And they called the police. The police arrested him, and he was acquitted because in the state of Indiana, this happened at Purdue University, and in the state of Indiana, sexual assault by impersonation or fraud or deception or concealment, none of that is a crime. And there's no definition for consent. If there were a definition for consent as freely given, knowledgeable, and informed agreement, then he would be committing a crime under Indiana statutes. But that was not the case in Indiana. So he was acquitted, and I worked with the State Representative Sally Segrist in trying to close up that particular legal loophole in the law in Indiana. And the bill that Representative Segrist had created, she did not win re-election, so she had to turn it over to another representative whose name was Donna Shavely, who introduced the law. In Indiana, you need 3 hearings in each house, the Senate and the Assembly or House of Representatives, in order to pass in those houses. And this particular bill only got 1 reading. So we were not able to plug up this particular loophole in Indiana's laws. And we also, there was also a bill to define consent. I'm not unhappy that that particular bill did not get signed into law because it was a crummy bill. It really didn't properly define consent. But another legislator in South Carolina picked up on this case. We were on BuzzFeed and Inside Edition. I was on Nightline. So she had seen some of the press that we got on this particular bill. And so Representative Mandy Powers Norrell in South Carolina said, not in my state. And she introduced a bill in South Carolina. Hasn't passed yet. But right now, our focus is the bill in Pennsylvania, because it will actually be the first bill that correctly defines consent in the laws of any state. And it says, consent is freely given knowledgeable and informed agreement without the influence of force, duress, coercion, deception, not impersonation, I'm trying to remember. And artifice, concealment and artifice, and fraud. So it really covers everything that has to be covered and identifies what the actual definition for consent really is. So once we get it introduced in Pennsylvania, then, I hope everybody that's listening to this calls me so that we can get outreach ambassadors to call up the legislators in their state and insist that we get this legislation introduced in every state across the country. We also have ambassadors in Nigeria, in India, in the UK, in Canada, and a couple of other, Hong Kong. Call me. Don't call. I'm sorry.
Go to the website. Her phone number is 123-555. What you've been sharing with us is a movement of change and a very difficult journey, because the law, as you said, there's a lot of loopholes. There's state and city and all of the different things that have to happen. And so having a warrior or a team of warriors that just say, I'm passionate about helping women or others in the future. And so I think this should be done in stepping up. So for anyone that's out there that is looking for some way to make a difference in this world, join Joyce. Joyce has been doing this for a long time. Her passion, her heart has been in it. And she's going to change the world, but she needs your help. So step up and go to her website. I'll have the name across the bottom here, right under her face will be the URL that you'll go to, and just step up and start making a difference.
Thank you so much, Tracy. Together we can make the world a safer place. And that's really what this is all about.
That is what we all want to do. And I am so honored that you took the time to talk to me today and get us a good look of the New York skyline back there, and take the time to educate people that are in my world so that they can step up and help you. And let's get some of these laws changed so that sexual abuse and other types of abuse that consent is involved in has that definition, so that a judge isn't telling a jury, oh, you're smart, figure it out. Let's get it on the books and let's make it easier. So thank you so much for joining us.
By the way, the Harvey Weinstein judge told the jury the same thing, use your common sense. And Harvey Weinstein even said, oh, but it's just, I'm so confused. And all men are confused. We need to stop the confusion. Enough is enough.
Exactly. It's also just another place where they could shelter themselves from being stupid. So, let's plug it all up, fix that umbrella. I love the visual of that, and cork up those holes. So thank you for joining me, and everybody visit her website.
Thank you.
Welcome. And where's my end? I don't know why it's not having an end. Oh, no, stop video. I don't know how to stop recording. We'll just do that at the end. We'll say, Matt, cut out after this, because I can't find end recording. Anyway, sweetie, thank you so much. I put the URL on there. We'll get this out there. My assistant only works 2 days a week. So I would imagine by the end of next week, it'll be stuck together. And
to do it before the end of SAM, right? The Sexual Assault Awareness Month.
Is that this month?
April 30th. Yeah, this is Sexual Assault Awareness Month.
Ooh, okay. Well, I will make him put it on his list for Monday, and we'll get it out as soon as we can.
April 30th is the end date for Sexual Assault Awareness Month. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's see what we can do to help that.
Thank you.
All right, my friend. I will talk to you soon. Bye, honey.
Bye-bye now.
Well, I hope that was interesting for you. There's a lot of us that are out here making a difference, and I'm hoping that maybe you can do the same. Step up and see what your state does on the laws of consent. And let's help to find an answer that actually helps start and put some of these people in jail. And we don't leave it up to a judge to tell them, oh, you're adults, use your judgment. Let's have an explanation. Really, we're talking about sexual predators here. Let's make a difference.